The crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Manhattan, where the annual Women in Leadership Summit brought together the most powerful female executives from around the globe. Designer gowns worth tens of thousands of dollars swept across marble floors as tech CEOs, oil heiresses, pharmaceutical giants, and media moguls exchanged business cards that could reshape entire industries with a single signature. The air buzzed with conversations in multiple languages about merger deals, stock valuations, and political influence that extended to the highest levels of government. Waitresses in elegant black uniforms glided between tables laden with baccarat crystal and Hermes centerpieces, serving champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a month. This was a gathering where billion-dollar empires were discussed as casually as weekend plans, where a single handshake could determine the fate of thousands of employees across continents. The venue itself radiated old money sophistication, its walls adorned with original masterpieces, and its atmosphere thick with the kind of confidence that comes from wielding genuine power in a male-dominated world. Yet moving quietly through the shadows of this feminine fortress of wealth and influence was a man whose presence would soon challenge every assumption these accomplished women held about intelligence, dignity, and the true nature of strength. Ethan Rodriguez pushed his maintenance cart through the service corridors with practiced efficiency, his weathered hands gripping the handle as he navigated the labyrinthine passages beneath the hotel. At 36, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had shouldered responsibilities far beyond his years. Yet his dark eyes still held the spark of an intellect that poverty and hardship had only sharpened. The janitor's uniform he wore was meticulously clean but showed the wear of countless washing cycles, a stark contrast to the designer wardrobes that filled the ballroom above. 4 years had passed since Maria's sudden death from a brain aneurysm. 4 years since he had become the sole guardian of their daughter Isabella, now 8 years old. The medical bills from Maria's final weeks had consumed their modest savings and forced him into bankruptcy, leaving him to cobble together a living from multiple cleaning jobs across the city. By day, he maintained office buildings in Midtown Manhattan. By night, he worked private events like this one, invisible to the powerful women who barely registered his existence as anything more than part of the building's furniture. Yet Ethan carried within him something that no amount of money could purchase. A vast repository of knowledge accumulated through years of passionate self-education in classical literature, ancient philosophy, and linguistic studies. His small apartment in the Bronx overflowed with library books on subjects ranging from medieval Islamic scholarship to contemporary feminist theory, a testament to an intellectual hunger that financial hardship could not diminish. The evening had proceeded without incident until Ethan entered the main ballroom to replace the towels in the executive washroom. The conversations swirling around him represented billions in combined wealth and influence that stretched from Silicon Valley boardrooms to European Parliament buildings. He moved with careful invisibility between tables where pharmaceutical heiress Victoria Blackwood discussed patent acquisitions with tech mogul Sarah Chen, where oil executive Amanda Petroff debated OPEC strategies with media empress Diana Sterling. These women had shattered glass ceilings in industries traditionally dominated by men, building empires through ruthless intelligence and uncompromising ambition. Ethan had learned to navigate such events by becoming part of the background, understanding that his role was to maintain the pristine environment without disrupting the delicate choreography of power and wealth. As he wheeled his cart toward the washroom, one of the wheels caught on an uneven marble joint, causing the cart to lurch sideways. A spray bottle tumbled from its perch, striking the corner of a nearby table and sending a crystal water glass crashing to the floor. The sharp sound of breaking crystal cut through the sophisticated murmur of conversation like a gunshot, instantly drawing the attention of dozens of the world's most powerful women. Ethan immediately dropped to his knees, his face flushing with embarrassment as he began collecting the scattered fragments with trembling hands. The accident was minor, easily rectified, but in a room where perfection was not just expected but demanded, even small disruptions became magnified symbols of incompetence. Victoria Blackwood observed the scene from her position at the head table, her steel-gray eyes narrowing with the predatory focus that had made her pharmaceutical empire worth $14 billion. Born into British aristocracy and educated at Oxford and Harvard Business School, she had built her fortune by identifying weakness and exploiting it with surgical precision. The clumsy janitor provided her with an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of cutting wit that had made her legendary in corporate boardrooms across London and New York. Her voice, cultured and precise with upper-class British inflection, carried clearly across the marble expanse as she addressed her tablemates in fluent French. Regardez ce pathétique spécimen de la classe ouvrière américaine. Ces créatures sont tellement primitives qu'elles ne peuvent même pas accomplir les tâches les plus simples sans tout détruire. Je suppose que c'est ce qui arrive quand on permet aux classes inférieures de contaminer nos espaces civilisés. The words flowed from her lips with casual cruelty. Look at this pathetic specimen of the American working class. These creatures are so primitive they cannot even accomplish the simplest tasks without destroying everything. I suppose this is what happens when we allow the lower classes to contaminate our civilized spaces. Her companions at the table, German automotive heiress Greta Zimmermann and French luxury goods mogul Celeste Dubois, responded with appreciative laughter, their amusement spreading to nearby tables as the French was translated into whispered English. The women felt secure in their assumption that their linguistic superiority would protect them from any consequences, that their contempt would remain safely incomprehensible to the American servant scrambling to clean up his mess. Ethan's hands stilled among the glass fragments as the familiar cadences of academic French washed over him. The language that Victoria wielded as a weapon of class distinction was one he had mastered during his years of studying medieval European literature, particularly the philosophical works of Christine de Pizan and the courtly poetry that had shaped Western literary tradition. He had spent countless nights working through the complexities of old French texts, tracing the evolution of Romance languages, and immersing himself in the intellectual traditions that these women assumed belonged exclusively to their privileged class. For a moment, the ballroom faded around him. Replaced by memories of oil-stained library books propped open on his kitchen table, while Isabella slept, of correspondence courses completed during lunch breaks, of the profound joy he had discovered in unlocking the secrets of linguistic evolution. He thought of his daughter, who trusted him to face the world with dignity and tact, despite their humble circumstances. He thought of Maria, whose dying words had emphasized the importance of education and self-respect in the face of social prejudice. Slowly, Ethan rose to his feet, the broken crystal forgotten at his feet. When he lifted his head, his eyes held a quiet strength that seemed to transform his entire presence from apologetic servant to something approaching scholarly authority. The conversations around him continued, but perceptive observers began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a change in the dynamic that few could identify, but many could sense. When Ethan spoke, his voice carried across the ballroom with the precise articulation of classical French rhetoric, each syllable perfectly pronounced in the academic dialect of the Sorbonne. Madame, je crois que Simone de Beauvoir aurait trouvé ironique qu'une femme qui a bénéficié de la lutte pour l'égalité utilise maintenant sa position privilégiée pour humilier ceux qui n'ont pas eu ses avantages. Comme elle l'a écrit dans le deuxième sexe, l'oppression ne devient pas plus noble simplement parce qu'elle est exercée par ceux qui ont eux-mêmes été opprimés. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as hundreds of heads turned toward the source of the eloquent French that had just filled the room with unexpected sophistication. Victoria's face underwent a dramatic transformation, confusion, giving way to recognition, and then to a deep flush of embarrassment that colored her aristocratic features. The janitor had not only understood her insult, but had responded with a literary reference that demonstrated intimate familiarity with feminist intellectual tradition. His words carried the weight of serious scholarship. Madam, I believe Simone de Beauvoir would have found it ironic that a woman who benefited from the struggle for equality now uses her privileged position to humiliate those who have not had her advantages. As she wrote in The Second Sex, oppression does not become more noble simply because it is exercised by those who have themselves been oppressed. The classical reference hung in the air like a gentle rebuke that cut deeper than any angry retort could have managed, demonstrating not just linguistic competence, but sophisticated understanding of the philosophical foundations underlying the very movement that had enabled these women to achieve their positions of power. The silence stretched across the ballroom as the implications of what had just occurred settled over the gathering of powerful women. Here was a janitor in a worn uniform who had just delivered a critique of feminist philosophy that would have been appropriate in any graduate seminar at the world's leading universities. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a Spanish pharmaceutical executive with degrees from Cambridge and MIT, stepped forward with the expression of someone recognizing unexpected intellectual kinship. Several other women moved closer, their curiosity overriding their initial shock at having their assumptions so thoroughly challenged. But Ethan was not finished with his demonstration of scholarly depth. Drawing from years of intensive study in comparative literature and feminist theory, he continued in the same measured French. Christine de Pizan, dans La Cité des Dames, nous rappelle que la vraie noblesse réside dans la vertu et la sagesse, pas dans les circonstances de naissance ou de richesse. Et Marie de Gournay, la fille d'Alliance de Montaigne, a écrit que l'intelligence n'a pas de sexe ni, j'ajouterais, de classe sociale. His pronunciation remained flawless as he quoted Christine de Pizan in The City of Ladies, reminds us that true nobility resides in virtue and wisdom, not in circumstances of birth or wealth. And Marie de Gournay, Montaigne's adopted daughter, wrote that intelligence has no gender, nor, I would add, social class. The references demonstrated not just casual familiarity with feminist literary history, but deep engagement with the philosophical questions that had driven centuries of intellectual development. Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly, recognizing both the accuracy of the citations and the graceful way this unexpected scholar was transforming potential humiliation into an impromptu seminar on the relationship between knowledge and social justice. Sarah Chen, the Taiwanese-American tech mogul, whose artificial intelligence company had revolutionized data processing, found herself genuinely fascinated by this development. As someone who had built her fortune by recognizing patterns that others missed, she was intrigued by the intellectual sophistication that had emerged from such an unlikely source. Her question, posed in English with the directness that had made her legendary in Silicon Valley negotiations, cut through the lingering shock. "What else have you studied?" The inquiry opened a floodgate of curiosity from other women who had built their careers on the ability to identify talent and potential regardless of its packaging. Ethan's response revealed the breadth of his self-directed education. "I've focused primarily on comparative literature and linguistics, with particular attention to how philosophical ideas have evolved across cultures and time periods. I find that understanding historical patterns of thought helps illuminate contemporary social dynamics." The answer was delivered with the same combination of expertise and humility that had characterized his earlier responses, demonstrating intellectual sophistication without academic pretension. Diana Sterling, whose media empire had made her one of the most influential women in American politics, pressed further. "And where did you pursue these studies?" The question hung in the air like a test, with everyone present understanding that the answer would determine whether Ethan was a formerly privileged person who had fallen on hard times, or something even more remarkable, a genuinely self-taught scholar who had achieved mastery without institutional support. "I'm entirely self-taught," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the intense scrutiny focused on him. "I've relied primarily on public libraries and online resources, though I've been fortunate to correspond with several university professors who have been generous with their guidance." The admission created a wave of genuine amazement through the assembled executives, many of whom had attended the world's most prestigious universities and understood how difficult it would be to achieve the level of intellectual sophistication that Ethan had just demonstrated without formal institutional support. Amanda Petrov, the Russian-born oil executive, whose energy consortium controlled significant portions of European petroleum distribution, stepped forward with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something unprecedented. "Your knowledge of feminist literary history is quite remarkable. Have you studied other philosophical traditions with similar depth?" The question revealed her own sophisticated educational background, a doctorate in political philosophy from Moscow State University, and her recognition that Ethan's learning extended far beyond casual reading. His response demonstrated familiarity with Islamic philosophy, ancient Greek political theory, and contemporary post-colonial criticism that would have impressed professors at Harvard or Oxford. Each answer revealed new layers of intellectual depth, suggesting years of disciplined study undertaken with the kind of passion that transforms mere information into genuine wisdom. The women who had gathered around him found themselves engaged in the kind of stimulating intellectual conversation that was rare even in their elevated circles, where business considerations often overshadowed purely academic discourse. Victoria Blackwood, the pharmaceutical heiress whose initial cruelty had triggered the evening's transformation, watched the scene unfold with growing unease. The tables had turned so completely that she found herself in the unfamiliar position of being the least sophisticated person in the conversation, her privileged education suddenly seeming shallow compared to the depth of knowledge that this janitor had acquired through pure intellectual curiosity. The realization was profoundly disturbing for someone who had built her identity around assumptions of inherent superiority based on class and educational credentials. Dr. Vasquez, recognizing the dynamics at play, posed a question that brought the philosophical discussion into sharp focus. "How do you reconcile your obvious intellectual capabilities with your current employment situation?" The inquiry was tactfully phrased, acknowledging both Ethan's scholarly abilities and the apparent contradiction between his knowledge and his circumstances. His response revealed the practical realities that had shaped his choices: the need to provide immediate income for his daughter, the flexibility that cleaning jobs offered for someone managing single parenthood, and the way that physical work had actually complemented his intellectual pursuits by providing time for reflection and mental processing. The explanation resonated with several of the women present, particularly those who had faced their own struggles in balancing career ambitions with family responsibilities, though none had faced the economic constraints that had limited Ethan's options. As the impromptu seminar continued, other conversations in the ballroom gradually ceased as more women gravitated toward the remarkable intellectual exchange taking place near the cleaning cart. The evening's original agenda, networking among financially powerful women, had been superseded by something more substantive, a genuine engagement with ideas and their implications for understanding social dynamics and human potential. Greta Zimmermann, whose automotive empire had made her one of Germany's wealthiest individuals, found herself asking detailed questions about medieval Islamic contributions to European philosophical development, a subject she had never considered despite her advanced degrees in engineering and business administration. Celeste Dubois, the French luxury goods mogul, discovered that her assumptions about American intellectual culture had been thoroughly challenged by this janitor's sophisticated understanding of French literary tradition. The most profound transformation, however, was occurring in the women who had initially laughed at Victoria's cruel comments, who now found themselves confronting uncomfortable truths about their own prejudices and the ways that privilege could blind them to merit wherever it might appear. The cleaning cart, which had earlier represented the dividing line between the powerful and the powerless, had become the center of the most intellectually stimulating conversation many of these accomplished women had experienced in months. The evening's formal program resumed eventually, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had been fundamentally altered by the recognition that worth and wisdom could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Business cards were quietly pressed into Ethan's hand, along with invitations to continue conversations about literature, philosophy, and the complex relationships between knowledge and social mobility. Sarah Chen, whose tech empire was built on identifying unconventional solutions to complex problems, offered him a position in her company's research division that would utilize his analytical abilities and cross-cultural knowledge. Diana Sterling mentioned opportunities in her media organization for someone with his linguistic skills and intellectual depth. Even Dr. Vasquez suggested academic connections that could help formalize his extensive self-directed education. The offers represented not charity but recognition of genuine intellectual value, acknowledgement that Ethan's years of passionate study had created capabilities that their organizations could benefit from employing. Victoria Blackwood, meanwhile, retreated to a corner table, where she sat in contemplative silence, forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that her inherited advantages had not prevented her from being intellectually outclassed by someone she had dismissed as fundamentally inferior. The experience was proving to be a profound lesson in the dangers of confusing circumstantial privilege with inherent worth. As the evening progressed toward its conclusion, several women made a point of approaching Ethan to express their admiration for his grace under pressure and their respect for his intellectual achievements. Amanda Petrov, drawing from her own experience of rising from modest circumstances in post-Soviet Russia, spoke with particular emotion about the inspiration she found in his dedication to learning despite economic hardship. Dr. Vasquez offered to facilitate introductions to academic colleagues who might be interested in his insights on comparative literary analysis. The transformation in how he was perceived had been complete and irreversible, where once he had been invisible, he was now the center of respectful attention from some of the world's most accomplished women. The cleaning cart that he had pushed into the ballroom as a symbol of his servant status had become the unlikely podium from which he had demonstrated that intellectual distinction transcends economic circumstances. When Victoria finally approached him during a quiet moment near the service area, her voice lacked any trace of the earlier arrogance. "I owe you a sincere apology. My comments were unworthy of someone who claims to support the advancement of merit regardless of circumstances." The apology carried weight because it was delivered without qualification or excuse, representing genuine recognition of her failure to live up to the principles she had advocated throughout her career as a champion of women's rights in business. Ethan's response to Victoria's apology demonstrated the same combination of grace and intellectual sophistication that had characterized his entire evening. We all have moments when our assumptions override our better judgment. The important thing is that we learn to question those assumptions and grow from the experience. His words offered forgiveness while gently reinforcing the lesson that the evening had taught about the dangers of prejudice based on economic or social status. The exchange was witnessed by several other women who found themselves reflecting on their own biases and the ways that success could sometimes insulate them from recognizing worth in unexpected forms. As Ethan prepared to leave the ballroom for the final time, the business cards in his pocket represented genuine opportunities for advancement rather than mere networking gestures. Sarah Chen's offer alone would provide the financial stability and intellectual challenges that he had long sought, enabling him to provide Isabella with the opportunities that every parent dreams of offering their child. But perhaps more importantly, the evening had validated years of solitary study and intellectual curiosity, proving that knowledge pursued for its own sake could ultimately transform not just individual circumstances, but also the perceptions of those who witnessed its application. The women who had attended the summit expecting to network among their peers had instead encountered something more valuable. A reminder that intelligence and wisdom could emerge from any circumstances, and that true leadership required the humility to recognize merit wherever it appeared. The subway ride home provided Ethan with time to process the evening's remarkable developments. The business cards in his wallet seemed to carry the weight of possibility, though he remained cautious about allowing hope to override the practical realities that had shaped his life for so many years. He had learned through bitter experience that dramatic changes rarely materialized overnight, and that dignity lay in maintaining one's principles regardless of external circumstances. Still, as the train carried him through the tunnels toward his modest apartment in the Bronx, he allowed himself to imagine Isabella's reaction when he told her about the evening's events. She had always taken pride in her father's learning, listening with fascination to his stories about the books he studied and the ideas he explored during his late-night reading sessions. Now he would have a story of genuine triumph to share, about how knowledge and grace had transformed a moment of humiliation into recognition and opportunity. The other passengers on the subway car saw only a tired janitor heading home after a long shift, unaware that they were sharing space with a man whose quiet intelligence had just challenged some of the most powerful women in the world to examine their assumptions about merit, worth, and the relationship between circumstances and capability. The evening had proven that intellectual distinction could emerge from any background, and that true sophistication lay not in inherited privilege, but in the cultivation of wisdom and the grace to share it with humility. Isabella was sleeping peacefully when Ethan arrived at their small apartment, her dark curls spread across the pillow that had belonged to her mother. He stood in the doorway watching her gentle breathing, feeling the familiar surge of protective love that had sustained him through the darkest periods of grief and financial struggle that had followed Maria's death. Tomorrow morning over breakfast, he would share the evening story with his daughter, emphasizing the importance of learning for its own sake rather than for any material rewards it might eventually bring. But tonight, he simply adjusted her blanket and settled into his reading chair, with the evening's events replaying in his mind like scenes from an improbable dream. The transformation he had witnessed in Victoria's expression, from casual cruelty to uncomfortable recognition to grudging respect, reminded him of something Maria had often said during her final weeks. Intelligence is the great equalizer, and education is the ladder that allows anyone to climb as high as their dedication will take them. The evening had provided him with an opportunity to test that philosophy under the most challenging circumstances imaginable, and he felt quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had not been found wanting when faced with the contempt of those who considered themselves his social superiors. As he prepared for bed, Ethan reflected on the mysterious ways that years of patient study and obscurity could suddenly become the key to transformation, and on the profound truth that knowledge, once acquired, could never be taken away by economic hardship or social prejudice. The following morning brought Isabella's delighted amazement when Ethan recounted his adventure over breakfast, her 8-year-old mind immediately grasping the essential drama of the story. Her father had been mistreated by powerful women who thought they were better than him, but he had proven through his intelligence and dignity that he was actually more accomplished than they had imagined. She made him promise to teach her some of the French phrases he had used, and her pride in his achievement glowed so brightly that Ethan felt tears of gratitude threatening to overflow. Later, as he called Sarah Chen to formally discuss her company's offer, he thought about the profound lesson that the previous evening had taught everyone present, that true distinction cannot be purchased with money, genuine wisdom cannot be inherited through family connections, and intellectual worth belongs to those who pursue it with dedication, regardless of their economic circumstances. The janitor's uniform hanging in his closet would soon be replaced by professional attire appropriate for his new role in corporate research, but the values that had sustained him through years of quiet struggle, intellectual curiosity, personal integrity, and unwavering devotion to his daughter would remain the foundation of his character. In the end, the evening's most significant transformation had not been in his material circumstances, but in the recognition by others of qualities that had always existed, waiting only for the right moment to be revealed and acknowledged by those with the wisdom to recognize merit wherever it might appear.